I'm Barbara Romeo. We're sitting in the back of a place called Rocky Hills here in Mount Kisco. It's a 13-acre site. 8 acres is gardens, all deer fenced around. It was started back in 1957 by a lovely couple, William and Henriette Sewer. William was the chief conservator for the Frick Museum in New York, so he was an artist. His wife Henriette was a interior designer, and she worked at Bloomingdale's and all. So they started this as artists rather than as gardeners, and created this wonderful garden, which I bought 2 years ago. This is my second summer here, and it's just such a joy to be here. Spring is probably the best time for it. It's just a wonderful place to be. So we're here for about 3/4 of the year, and then Rick and I live in Paris for about a quarter of the year, mostly in the winter time. Now, this area goes way back. When we bought the house 2 years ago, we were told the oldest part was from probably 1850. Ray Williams, who's the town historian and a wonderful fellow, told us just recently you could actually back that down to 1800, 1790s to 1800 for the oldest part. So this is a really old piece of property here. It belonged to the Van Tassel family at one point, which was a wealthy Dutch family in the area. Unfortunately, it wasn't the wealthier section of it that owned it, and it was actually a dumping grounds back in the 20s and 30s, to the point where today I dug up that. This kind of thing pops up all the time around, particularly further down near the 1896 barn. So at one point this was a dumping ground, and Henriette Sura told me how when they first started gardening here they were digging up old cars and tires and all kinds of things like that. But one of the wonderful things that they did do when they were developing this place was they left the old stone walls all around, and you really can see what an old farm really looked like back in the days in the 1700s. So it's an old historical place. The house is just basically an old farmhouse that's been added onto. There was a room added up here that it was a painter's studio for William Seward to be able to do some of this his own personal painting and also his restoring work. So it's it's an interesting old area, and it's part of the history of Mount Kisco and Chappaqua. So we're technically Mount Kisco mailing address, but we're in the town of Chappaqua for the school district and taxes, things like that. In the spring like this, when everything is just going crazy, it's a ton of weeding and watering. Although we had so much rain this spring, it's been pretty good. We also, because things, Mother Nature has her own way of doing things. This whole area back here was planted with the idea those plants stayed small. They were supposedly dwarf conifers. One would say that didn't work out so well. Over 18, 20 years since they were first planted, they've decided they're going to be good size. So I'm moving around a lot of things rather than buying new plants. We moved 2 trees that were up there on Sunday down to a very nice area down by the barn instead. So there's a lot of that going on, a lot of planning of what to do here, and then just a lot of hands-on weeding and enjoying it. I have to keep reminding myself to look up from the weeds and look at what else is around here. So a day will be, if it's a rainy day, it's a good day to actually plant and do things like that. If it's a beautiful sunny day, it's a good day to have a picnic down at the picnic table. The spring is probably the most spectacular time here, but then over the many years, it was developed into a summer garden as well. It really is a matter of whatever Mother Nature does. Trees fall and suddenly a shady spot becomes a bright sunny spot and things like that. So that's just a kind of a continuous work here. It's joyful work. I really, really do enjoy it, other than getting poison ivy occasionally. We have a landscape crew that comes once a week to do things like the lawns. The same crew, if we need specific work, will come and help us out. There's a wonderful fellow who works with them who comes sometimes on his own here and helps us. He helped us, Rick and I, move these trees up here. And then at times we have friends come over and help and things. But yeah, basically we're doing most of this ourselves. Well, originally the idea, this was going to be a Westchester County park. In 2000, Henriette Seward gave it to Westchester County. And at 2013, they turned around and gave it back to her and said, we can't afford it. And at that point, she was 95 years old. And so there wasn't a whole lot of time to do things. She died at 98 here in 2015. She was 96 when they gave it back to her. And it was still unclear what was going to happen with the garden, except there was an easement signed with Westchester Land Trust. I don't know if you know that group, but it's a wonderful group in Westchester County that tries to save open tracts of land.
Mm-hmm.
And they can do it a variety of ways. Some they outright own, but things like this, we've signed an agreement with them that this 13 acres never gets broken up. It will always remain together. We will never build a building taller than this or the barn down below. And the most important thing is the water quality. There's a beautiful stream, I'll show you after, that flows through, and that continues on down to the reservoir, and one of the many reservoirs around. So the quality of the water is incredibly important. So we don't use anything toxic here. We're very careful of, it would be much easier to go down these paths and just zap all those weeds, but in fact we do it by hand, which is a lot more intensive to do. Every once in a while when I'm frustrated, I'll go boil water and pour boiling water on them or something. But you just can't trust putting chemicals on. And
Yeah.
of course, gardening has changed so much in the last 20 years from the movement to do native plants, with the sense that native plants feed the population of birds and insects and animals that come through that need very specific things, from the butterflies, which we all know about, but also a lot of the birds need specific plants. And if you're putting in very exotic plants, they might look very beautiful and they have berries, but they're not necessarily what nurtures our native plant, our native species here. So we've kind of, Henriette started that movement to move more into planting native grasses, and also instead of a fall cleanup and cutting down some of the grasses get 6 feet tall and there are huge heads on them, and it used to be considered messy to leave them up, and she at one point was cutting them down. In the last few years, and I've continued it, you leave those up because they provide food and nourishment for the animals that are around, the birds that are around. And they also in the spring give shelter to, we had ducks land on the pond. And for the 2 or 3 weeks they were here, I could hear them, but they were hiding down into the grasses in the pond. It wouldn't come out whenever I was down there. They were quite shy, it seemed. And it gives them the chance to, whatever ducklings were in there. And then it hit 90 degrees one day and they were gone, which they should be doing. They're wild. They should be moving on. But the whole idea of, stewardship of the land is really important. And in a place as big as this, you can mix. Some people can be quite strident about only native, only this. I think in 13 acres we have the chance to do a bit of both. So we have a beautiful collection of 42 tree peonies up here, which are from China. Some of them are quite old. I think I don't have the actual records, although the Garden Conservancy is putting them together for me from notes that were kept on the place. And they, in China, can live for up to 100 years, and some of them do. So they're not native, clearly, but they're absolutely stunning plants. And I feel, I even took a class at New York Botanical Garden on tree peonies, just so I knew what I was doing with them. But it's important to keep up those as well. But as we continue planting, I do tend toward trying to put in native plants as much as I can do. It's a movement that certainly a lot of gardeners are doing, and it's good for the environment, I think. When I was a little kid growing up in Syracuse, outside of Syracuse, that's my accent coming through. I had a father who would every springtime drive me down to a little village where we lived in so I could pick out plants. And I had 4 brothers, 3 of whom were older, who would be told to go out and clear that so we can plant this, and I would plant a garden every summer, every spring into summer. So yeah, I always have. And then we lived, when we moved to the city after we were married, we lived in Brooklyn Heights for 14 years. And I always insisted that we live on the ground floor because I wanted an outdoor space. So I left at least 2 gardens behind in Brooklyn Heights, one of which is still, as you walk by it, I still see it. I mean, a lot has been done since to it, but it's still a garden that got created back when we bought our co-op there. So yeah, I've been into gardening. You know, for years raising our daughter, working full time in the city, there wasn't a whole lot of time to do that. So it's really a joy to now have the
Yeah.
time to wander out here whenever I feel like, almost. And I think, having not been able to do it for a number of years, it's so fun to be able to have that chance to do what you really have a bit of a passion about. I do believe in global warming. I do believe nature is changing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I can see it even here. Things are drier in certain areas, and I think we have to be very aware of what's going on and try and plant for the future. There's two areas that were set up to plant more dry type plants, so you don't have to use as much water. Use of water for just things like lawns, to me, is kind of a waste of a good resource. So we're trying to also create areas that don't need the sprinklers set on. There are 52 sprinklers set up for this place, and you could have them going all around
Mm-hmm.
all day if you really wanted to, because it's an outside well, that the water comes from a well. But that's not a good use of resource, you know. So we're doing things like putting in soaker hoses. This last year had sprinklers over here for the dahlias, this area, and this summer I'm putting in soaker hoses instead. So it's things like that, just, you know, trying to be more aware of
Mm-hmm.
what footprint we're leaving behind. And you know, you're a caretaker. This, you know, 40 years somebody else could have this place, or
Yeah.
20 years, or whatever. So you really do feel like you're a caretaker for the land, and you've got to be really careful what you do. So again, we use almost no we use no pesticides at all. And even when I really do have to use something, I use bioproducts, which there are always debates even about that. But as far as I can tell, these are ones that can be used, and can be used on certified properties that are green, you know, certified green, which this isn't. This is a mixture, but that's certainly the way I'd like to go, and I think a lot of farmers, a lot of gardeners do. There's Chappaqua Garden Club here, which is having its plant sale this weekend down in town, and I'm a member of that. And the speakers that have been brought in to speak, a lot of them address that kind of issue.
Mm-hmm.
There's a garden, Chappaqua, not Moms, but Chappaqua Garden Swap Facebook area that people are sharing information like that. You know, what insects are you seeing? Are you seeing invasive species of some kind moving in? What should we do about it? You know, there's
Mm-hmm.
much more talk, I think, than there were in the past. You just went out and you sprayed something in the past, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't do that anymore. So it's very positive, very positive. I think also people are taking out lawns a lot more and putting in other things. You know, interesting rock formations, and then some ground covering, not just mulch, but you know, actually a nice ground cover of some kind, which restores the place to a more natural look. And I'm all for that. We get a huge diversity of birds here. We have two huge great horned owls here, which are fabulous looking birds. Obviously huge raptors, but they were out in the front during the winter time in one of the trees, and you could hear one of them hooting. And then when I peered out to look at him, I could see the second one was right above it. But these are huge birds here, and you hear them in the afternoon. In fact,
Oh yeah.
no, that's not it. But you hear them out in the trees here at times. So huge diversity of birds you see coming through. We have coyote who comes through regularly, it seems. We had a red fox the other day, which is, they're adorable looking things. I guess they're only 8 or 10 pounds. They're kind of small, very bright red. It was quite a lovely creature. We have a possum and raccoons and groundhogs and all kinds of things in here. So we're all living together. Um, it's just such a wonderful thing to, when you stop working at it and you get that chance to sit down and just look. Or sometimes it's just a sense of awe. You know, you're looking around and you say, wow, what nature can do. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Um,